let's generate our motivation. So it's important before teachings that we not only have the right motivation for listening, but also that our refuge in the three jewels is strong and intact. Because we're learning the teaching of the Buddha, we should have proper refuge, proper trust, proper respect for the Buddha, for his realizations, the Dharma, and for the Sangha, those who have realized the nature of reality directly. If we don't have good refuge and trust the three jewels, then again, whatever teachings we hear are not really going to go in very deep. That doesn't mean we have blind belief. We should think critically. But our critical thinking also should lead us to really trust the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, because through our examination and applying what they teach to our own mind to check it out and see if it's true, then we realize that the Buddha really knew what he was talking about. So it's an intelligent kind of refuge that comes from having conviction, and the conviction comes through examination and investigation of the teachings on our part. So with an attitude of trust for the holy beings and compassion for the sentient beings, then our mind is really in the right frame to take the teachings to heart. So cultivate that in your mind now. So when we go to hear teachings, we normally prostrate at the beginning of them, and bowing to the three jewels is a way of opening our mind to be receptive to the teachings. Because the act of bowing is showing that we are humbling ourselves. We are saying, I don't know everything. I'm relying on those who know more and understand more and have realized more than I understand or than I have. So that kind of coming to teachings with a mind of respect is very important if we come to teachings with a mind of, well, let's see what this guy has to say, or a mind of, I know a lot, I don't know, maybe he has something to add to it, maybe not. Yeah, then is much Dharma going to go in? Are we even listening to Dharma, or are we listening to things that will bolster our self-centered ego? Okay, so this is quite important. They talk about 3 pots. Yeah, not being like 3 pots. So you may have heard this analogy before, but I know for myself, it's always good to remember this analogy. So it's to avoid 3 pots. One is the upside down pot. Okay, so the sun is shining and no sunlight gets in the pot. Okay, why? Because the pot is upside down. So sometimes we go to teachings and, it doesn't, we're not even listening, we're daydreaming, we're fantasizing, we're thinking of what we're going to do afterwards. We're thinking of all the retreats we're going to do in the future. Our mind is like not really paying attention to the teaching very much. Okay, so it's not going in, like the sunlight doesn't go in the upside down pot. Okay, so you get beyond that and something is going in. Yeah, you're paying attention to the teachings. But then afterwards, when somebody says, oh, what did the teacher talk about? Dharma. You can't remember any more than that. Why? In one ear, out the other. Okay, so we weren't really, again, taking it in. We were quite distracted. And then the last pot, to avoid being like, is the pot that's turned right side up, but it's filled with filth. Okay, so the sunlight goes in. Yeah, or if you're pouring water, the water goes in, but it's completely mixed with the muck in the pot. So that's if we're listening to the teachings with the wrong motivation. Like I was saying before, let's see what these people are saying. Maybe they know something interesting. Yeah. Or I don't know about this Buddhism stuff. It's really, full of Eastern culture and, or the teacher doesn't speak good English, or, the teacher's really rather boring. I want lively teachings, like when I watch TV, something that keeps me interested. Okay? Or we're listening with the wrong motivation. Oh, I'll learn something and then I can become a teacher and go teach other people. Okay, so definitely wrong motivation. So we want to avoid being like that. Yeah. Okay. Now you may wonder, why in a course about monastic ordination, I'm talking about things that you hear in regular Dharma teachings. It's because they're important. Yeah, and it's really important that we take some of these basic things really to heart. Yeah. Otherwise, if we have time, we'll get to some passages in the Pali Canon where they talk about what happens to some people after they ordain and they become kind of, well, they become corrupt, basically. And the sutras talk about seeking offerings, seeking a group of disciples who follow along, like that. And that, seeking that kind of stuff completely corrupts your practice. Doesn't matter how many people think that you're enlightened or fantastic or whatever, if your own mind is seeking things of this life, then it's not a Dharma mind. Yeah. And that can easily happen, especially if you receive a lot of respect and offerings. Yeah. That usually, the Western Sangha does usually not receive a lot of respect and offerings. And if you're a nun, definitely not. Not definitely, but yeah. But even if you get a little bit, and even if you can sit in the front row, because you're finally wearing robes, you can elbow everybody else aside and plop down in the front row. Then still, the mind is looking for recognition, praise, status of this life. So when people sometimes come to me and they say, I want to ordain because I want to be a teacher. Yeah. Or I want to ordain because I want to be a translator. I want to ordain so that I can be a meditation instructor. I'm always a little bit hesitant because the motivation is to be somebody. Yeah. I want to be a teacher. I want to learn the Dharma so I can be a teacher. Yeah. So I can be a translator. So I can be a meditation instructor. So I can be somebody and anchor my ego in some kind of something to show that there's a real me here, and that real me is definitely really worthwhile because look at what I am. Okay. And I think, my philosophy is we should come with the motivation of, I want to learn the Dharma and put it into practice. Not, I want to be a fill in the blank. Yeah, I want to learn the Dharma and put it into practice. And then if you have that motivation, that's what you're going to do as you learn and practice everything. And then if you happen someday to be in the role of a teacher, which is different than being a teacher. Do you see the difference between being in the role of a teacher and being a teacher, or being in the role of a translator versus being a translator? Okay, or being in the role of a meditator instead of being a meditator. Okay, so it is how we phrase something, how we think of something can really make a difference in our own mind. Okay, or you're a monastic, I am a senior, rather than being in the role of being a senior. Okay, because when we're in the role of something, we realize that's not who we are. And a role is something that is dependent on external circumstances. Yeah. What makes somebody a teacher? The fact that there's students who come and say, please teach me. Nobody's a teacher from their own side. Yeah. People have to come and say, please teach, Same with being a translator. Yeah, you can translate for yourself. Yeah, but being you're reading something, you want to learn the other language, that's fine. But being a translator, so that you sit in the front of the room or your name goes on the bottom of the published thing, okay? Those are roles. Roles are things that are dependently arising, dependent on the situation and the circumstance. Okay, so we're in that role. We are not that thing. Okay, and thinking like this is quite helpful. Making a habit of thinking like this. I'm in the role of, helps us think about dependent arising. And that helps us remember that things are empty of inherent existence. Whereas when we really create identities and cling to them, there's a lot of grasping there. And then when we're in situations where people, where that identity that we're clinging to does not matter to the people around us, then we feel really insecure. Yeah, I started reading Mingyur Rinpoche's book, In Love with the World. And it's so interesting because he decides to go on a wandering retreat. Yeah. And what shocks him when he leaves his monastery and goes to the Gaya train station is nobody recognizes him as a Rinpoche, And he's saying how, well, he, usually he always has an attendant. He's never alone. He always goes to the first class waiting room to wait while the attendant finds out which car it is and gets any food or drinks and takes care of the coolie and the luggage. He sits there in the aircon first class room. When he gets on the plane, then the attendant makes the bed and the seat, and there's some brocade, and everything's very nice, and and he's just used to this. And other people board the train and they see he's, sitting with his nice robes and his brocade, and they all show respect because they identify, well, he must be some highly realized religious person. And so he gets the best seat. He's not crowded in with the other people. And, on his wandering retreat, he left his monastery alone. He went to the Gaya train station alone. He had to get the ticket alone. He had never been alone before. He got on the train. Everybody said, and the only place he could sit was on the floor. At first, he was squished among all the people. Then he sat on the floor. Yeah, nobody was going, oh, there's a High Lama. Yeah. So, and this was really a big shock to him. So we all have our own identities like this of who we think we are and how people should treat us. And many of these times, we're totally oblivious to it. Yeah. And I think some of the racial reckoning that's happening in this country now is because some people are totally oblivious to who they think they are and how other people should treat them. And then when other people don't treat them that way, they're quite upset. Yeah, don't you realize who I am? Yeah. Well, we should be asking ourselves that question. Yeah, who am I? Yeah, that I think I'm so important that according to my list of requirements, this is the way people should regard me and treat me. Okay, so that's why I think it's helpful to say I'm in the role of this, that, and the other thing. In the role of, it's something temporary. Yeah, it's not who we are. And so when we bow at the beginning of teachings, this is part of what's going on. We're emptying ourselves of all of this stuff, who we think we are and what we deserve and how we should be taught and da, 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 da. And we're trying to come as a clean, clear vessel that can really take the teachings in.
But this also apply to thinking we're in the role of a monastic, because I sort of struggled with taking on that identity. I felt very stiff and very like heavy, and like I couldn't relate to other people, like as just a human being. And then I realized, oh, I'm holding this too tightly, and I have to remind myself I'm just a human being, because
Yeah.
otherwise I feel like I must be proper, I must be formal, I must be perfect. So should we think of monastic as a role too?
Okay, it depends where you are. I think when you first ordain, it's very helpful to think I am a monastic. But I am a monastic. The problems you were facing is because our mind takes that word monastic and heaps a bunch of other stuff on top of it that word doesn't have. When you're out in the public, again, it's sometimes better, I'm in the role of a monastic, so that we don't think I'm special and should be treated specially. But sometimes saying I am a monastic helps us not to grab things like this, but to realize that people to think that we want to be of benefit to the people who perceive the robes. We don't want to harm those people. And if we behave in an atrocious way, we're harming the other people who see us, because they lose faith in the Dharma. So being a monastic doesn't mean you need to be uptight. Okay, I got to be perfect. And then your idea, what you have is your idea of perfection. Yeah, so that's why I say it's coming from our mind. My idea of perfection. Yeah, I've got to act like a Rinpoche, and like, I just have to be perfect and gentle, and everything that comes out of my mouth needs to be Dharma, and I need to act in a very dignified way, and people need to see that I am and respect me. You can bow here. You can put your offerings here. Okay? So we don't want to see ourselves like that. Or as you were doing, as, oh, I'm a monastic, I better be perfect. What does perfection mean? I've got to walk like this all the time. So some people, my idea of a monastic is I got to smile all the time. No, my idea of a monastic is I've got to be serious. I am a renunciate. I renounce you. Okay. So, yeah. So we've got to be a human being, okay? Or our idea of being a monastic is, well, I'm in training to be a lama, and lamas are charismatic. So I've got to be charismatic, okay? So this is one thing that I should have mentioned when we were talking about teachers the other day, is charisma is not one of the characteristics listed in the sutras for a good teacher. Okay, this is quite important because we are very prone to look for charisma and think that charisma makes somebody a fantastic teacher. Charisma doesn't mean you know the Dharma well or that you have realizations. Maybe it means you have a good sense of humor, or maybe it means that you have dazzling eyes. I don't know. but it's none of that is the characteristics to look for a teacher. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay. What do you mean by later?
You said when people first become a monastic, it's good
Yeah.
for them to think in that way.
Yeah. What I say that because you're at that time adjusting to a different role. Okay. Once you've lived as a monastic for a while, you don't think I'm a monastic. It is just who you are. Okay. And you're completely relaxed with it in a public setting. Somebody once offered Sanghadana, and we were going into a restaurant, and she said, "Are you aware that everybody's staring at you?" I said, "No." Yeah. Because I had been ordained so long that this is, people look at me, people don't look at me, so what? I don't even notice it anymore. Yeah.
In this context, just one thing that I heard at the beginning when I ordained, what was very helpful for me was like the joining of personality and monastic. It's kind of you have this process of that your personality and the monastic part that joins together, and at one point this comes kind of natural, but at the beginning it feels like these are two things.
Yeah.
And then slowly kind of this comes together and integrates one to the other. So I felt that image very helpful, and it fits
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying now.
Yeah, it's just who you are. When you're as you train, and first, is training your body and speech, the external things. Then yeah, it just becomes automatically how you act. And I think this also points to why it's important to live in a community, because when you first ordain, you don't know the etiquette. You don't know how to act as a Sangha member. When you live with the other people, you learn either through osmosis, or you learn because, by watching the people around you, or you learn through your teacher explaining those things. Yeah. What I've found is that people in Asia learn a lot by osmosis. You live in that situation with other monastics, and you watch how people behave, and then you adjust yourself, to behave in that way, because that's just what you do. Westerners, I found, are often very, how do you put it? I don't want to say thick-skulled, but we don't, often we don't learn by observing. We have to be told things directly many times, and so it's not, when I say thick-skulled, I'm talking about myself as well. Yeah. Because we don't look around and see what's the situation and how are people acting and what's appropriate behavior. We just go in there and, I want to do this and I want this, and should be like this. Yeah. A little bit like a bull in a china shop sometimes. This is just Western culture, isn't it? Yeah. And that doesn't work in a monastic environment. That's why training is important, and why, for Westerners especially, I think being in a monastic community where you get direct verbal instructions on things, because we don't pick it up through just watching. Okay. And so we have a lot of preconceptions that we come into monastic life with, and they kind of get battered around. I'll just give you one. When I went to receive bhikshuni ordination in Taiwan in 1986, there were two Westerners in like 550 people, in the ordination cohort, and there were two of us, me and then one woman who was about the age of my mom. Okay, and we had to. I mean, this is something you never do in the Tibetan tradition, which is line up outside of the meditation hall and then file in lines. Okay, so that you're lined up, you belong to a certain pod and you line up, and then everybody enters according, to where their pod is and where you stand. And when you walk in the meditation hall, you are already, you're standing up straight, your eyes are lowered, your hands are like this. If you take your shoes off, your shoes are lined up neatly side by side. Yeah. In Tibetan Buddhism, and Tibetans are, it's a different culture. So you run up to the steps, you come in any old order. The young one, the geshis are fine, they get in without being pushed around, but everybody else pushes people. Okay. And yeah, I'm not lying, am I? It's true. Yeah. So you get pushed around, and then you have to somehow find a seat, and your shoes are like, people just throw their shoes all over the place, So finding your shoes at the end is a little bit of an Easter hunt, um, Easter egg hunt. So it's a different way of behaving. But you see, when you're in Taiwan, how the people react when they see monastics. Yeah. And, you're nodding Vietnam. I think it's the same. People have that kind of training and dignity, when they're like that. And the public responds. Yeah. But when, the Tibetans have their own culture, but the Westerners, if we don't receive training, we just kind of walk in like, we walked in as a layperson and we're talking loudly and, putting our stuff here and there. What? Yeah, we have our water bottle and our 3 cushions and our table and, 3 books with us and our jola with some snacks in it. And, we come well prepared for everything. And we just kind of walk in and set out our empire. Yeah, and I'm always teasing people here in the meditation hall, you set up your little empire on your puja table, the picture of my teacher and my text and this and that and the other thing and my cushions and the whole rigmarole. Okay. And, other people are just in my way, like move over, I need more space. Yeah. And especially if I want to stretch my leg out, like, So we're not very refined. Yeah, but you can really see when people are trained and they act in a more refined way, the people, respond, the public responds. And when we first started the Abbey, I was the only monastic here. And when we had the first ordination, when Venerable Tarpa, who you will meet on Friday, she's coming, when she ordained, and then some of our Chinese nun friends came because we had to have a certain number of nuns to give the ordination. And instantly everybody else realized, oh, when there's 4 fully ordained people, the vibe around here changes. Something is different. Yeah. So it's not just one person, it's when you have that community and you are functioning together in such a way that you don't really need to talk about it. Yeah. It's just how to be. And people notice. Yeah. So I think it's quite important. This relates actually to the next question. Venerable Maytok, I'm finally getting to your question. So, yeah, I knew I would. So she's asking, and so what I was just talking about, okay, pertains to this. She says, how can we deal with intolerable behavior from monastics? It's a good question. There's different kinds of intolerable behavior. I'll get to that. So she continues, I understand at the Abbey there is a process of careful selection. If we happen to come in a situation to be together with a monastic who maybe would not have passed the test, but still managed somehow to get ordination somewhere, yeah, this creates difficult situations, especially in the presence of a lot of lay people, okay, who are not aware of appropriate monastic behavior, but are aware of appropriate human behavior. Okay, and then she says, the way how I solve the situation is I stay away from it. Okay, so this kind of thing it's a problem. I was actually thinking that it might be very helpful to watch. I'm going off on the side link. I'll come back. To watch the Meridian Trust videos about the conference that Western Buddhist teachers had with His Holiness in 1993. It was a conference of several days. I can't remember, 4 or 5 days. We spent one whole morning just talking about the situation of Western monastics. And I think it would be very helpful, to watch that together. I was there, but that was already how many years ago? In 93, almost 30 years ago. But the issues still pertain, okay? And yeah, so maybe see if we can find it on the internet or, huh? What? We know where it is? Okay. And find that particular morning. It was very good. Tenzin Palmo gave the first presentation and His Holiness responded. I gave the second one and he responded. Then Thubten Pende, some of you may know him, Jim Daughtery, he's no longer, he was the monk exemplar and he disrobed and got married. So he gave the third, and Achan Amaro gave the fourth presentation. Okay, so it's very interesting to see, what was brought up then and what are still issues now. And if we have time, we should also watch Sylvia Wetzel's presentation about women in the Dharma. There was an afternoon when we talked, it was an afternoon, talked about women in the Dharma, and she gave this fantastic presentation, which I will not even give you a hint about because it would ruin it. Sylvia Wetzel. Wetzel, Wetzel. Okay. She's a student of Lama Yeshe. Yeah, and she's a teacher now in Germany. Okay, so let's come back to this question, intolerable behavior from monastics. So the intolerable behavior could be of two kinds. One is doing unethical actions, actions that are naturally negative, killing, stealing, in the case of monastic ordination, having sexual relationships, lying, things that are ethically, negative. And then the other is more on just etiquette. And by etiquette, I don't mean being prim and proper like Victorian England. I'm talking about just having manners, because I never used to pay much attention to manners until I realized that a lot of human contact, a lot of human conflict comes because people don't keep good manners and other people get offended. Okay, so if we learn, excuse me, Marjorie Taylor Greene, yeah, Paul Gosart, what's the other one? Matt Gates, and our dear former Prez. The actions there, they're not considered good manners, are they? I mean, did your parents bring you up to talk to other people like that? Yeah, if I was a kid and I talked to other people like that, I would have gotten it. You don't go around insulting other people, calling them names or making lies about them and telling the world. Okay? Yeah. Do you agree that if, that's not how your parents brought you up? I mean, our parents did something good, didn't they? They taught us just basic manners. Okay. So just there's things like that. Things like, when you eat, do you fill your own plate full to the top and ignore the fact that other people have to take food from the buffet? Yeah, well, I go first, so I take as much as I want, and then you guys can have the rest. Yeah. And it's usually the beans and lentils and stuff I don't like, but when there's chocolate, who goes for it? So manners like that, just basic human manners, saying please and thank you, showing appreciation for other people, walking into a room and realizing we are not the star that everybody needs to notice. Yeah. So those two kinds of I think what she's calling intolerable behavior. So in terms of the first, if somebody is breaking precepts, if there's a monastic who is having sexual relationships with someone, doesn't matter, they're a teacher, they're, an ordinary person, you should report it. Okay. And, if somebody, especially women, if somebody, an ordained person ever comes on to you, if a monk comes on to you, you say no, you leave the situation. Okay. Don't just say no and hang out in the situation and hope he'll act better. You leave and you report it. And, there is no reason for monks to come on to women like that. Okay. And I say this quite openly. Nobody used to say this. Yeah. Because everybody, but there's been enough scandals that now you have to say this quite openly. Okay. If a monastic is embezzling money from the Dharma center, yeah, so then you should say something. Yeah. So this kind of intolerable behavior. Yeah. If they're sneaking out at night to go down to the bar, I mean, I'm saying all sorts of outrageous things, but sometimes you will meet people who do not uh, keep their precepts very well. Some of them may have ordained when they were little kids. They were put in the monastery as children, not so they didn't ordain by their own choice. Yeah. Some of them, were people who ordained later, but then, still strong attachment. Okay. So it doesn't mean these people are bad. Okay. We don't judge the person. We should have compassion for them. But the behavior is, as she says, intolerable, and it should be pointed out. Okay. And so if we are an ordained person, then we should be careful and not, you know, engage in that kind of behavior. And I say that because sometimes, when you're alone, you don't have any companions. This happens a lot when Tibetan teachers come to the West. They're sent as a lone monk to be the teacher in a Dharma center. They have no other Tibetan friends, nobody else who is monastic. They're always with lay people who don't know how monastics should be treated. And uh, and then, people are coming with lots of offerings and wanting to take them out here and there, and they get spoiled, and then their sila, their ethical conduct declines. Okay. I just thought of another story, but I'll tell you that one later, so I don't get off track. Okay, then with the other kinds of things, when people just don't have good conduct, and you're in a situation with them, um, what I do, I mean, it depends a lot on the situation. If it's a very uncomfortable situation, I too may leave. If it's a teaching situation, I want to be there and hear the teaching. So I just when I see other people behaving in an unbecoming way, I say to myself, this is what I look like when I behave that way. So this person is showing me what I look like. And therefore, I need to be careful because I don't want to uh, have that kind of appearance to other people. I don't want to adversely affect other people's image of the Dharma or image of the Sangha by, being a big mouth or bossing people around or, being inconsiderate. So I find that a very helpful way to think of things because our tendency is to look and criticize the person. And then we develop a very negative mind, and especially cultivating, a critical negative mind about the Sangha is not very helpful to our Dharma practice. But if we look at it and say, this is how I look when I do this, yeah, then that becomes very helpful to our minds. Yeah, I was too many stories. But I learned something from all these stories. Okay, I'll tell you this one. You know, so I was out to dinner in Nepal, and there was one Rinpoche in the group having dinner, and they brought the food, and then called the waiter over and said, "This food is horrible." And I forget what was wrong with the food, but you know how sometimes people make scenes in restaurants when the food isn't prepared right. So he was doing that, and I was like really embarrassed. And then, what I said is like, okay, I have to be careful not to act like this, because he's showing me how I look if I were to act like this. So if you're in a restaurant and they bring the food and it's not prepared properly, either you quietly say something to the waiter or you just eat it. Yeah, instead of making a scene. Okay, so things like that. Mhm. Another situation when she's talking about intolerable behavior. I don't know if I would call this intolerable, but it definitely wasn't proper. It was a very strange situation. I was invited to give some teachings at a Dharma center in the Midwest. Okay, so I went to the Dharma center. I went and I stayed at the home of the Dharma teacher, who was a layman, married with a wife, but he uh, wore, when he went to the Dharma center, he wore what looked like robes. Okay, um, because this is kind of a habit in Tibetan culture. The lay teachers, they're often wearing maroon robes. They're folded different than monastic robes. But if you don't know how robes are folded in the different traditions, the Gelupas fold them one way, the Nyingmas fold them the other way. If you don't know that and you just see somebody wearing maroon, you think that they're a monastic. Okay, so the layman going to the Dharma center would dress up like that, so he would look like a monastic, and they had a monk there that they were sponsoring, and the monk liked to wear lay clothes because he wanted to go walking around in the city. So I was sitting there like, this is an interesting situation, isn't it? Somebody who's not a monastic who wants to look like a monastic, and somebody who is a monastic who doesn't want to be seen as a monastic, wants to act as a lay person. Okay, so this is what brings about degeneration in the Dharma. And so we are all responsible. If we appreciate the Dharma and respect the Dharma, we are all responsible for acting properly so that we don't bring disrepute to the three jewels. Yeah, that doesn't mean we have to be perfect. It's not what you're talking about. Like, yeah, it just means we are a polite human being. Yeah, and and I watch myself sometimes, and I slip. Okay, so I should tell you some of those stories too. To be fair, I can't help just talk about the unbecoming stories of other people. Anyway, my favorite topic is talking about myself. So even if I talk about my own faults, I'm still the star. Okay, so I have two airplane stories. One is I was traveling all day. I was trying to get to Madison, Wisconsin for Geshe Zopa's teachings on time. I was traveling from I don't know where, but I had several different stops, and the plane was late and flights were canceled. And so I was on my last flight to get from wherever I was to Madison, and there was a whole crowd of people who wanted to get on that flight. And I just went up to where you go and you check in and all, and I pushed. Yeah, not in a really obnoxious way where everybody stared at me, but I pushed in a way that I wasn't very happy with myself. It was, I've got to get on this flight. Please do everything you can. Get me on this flight. So the people around the check-in counter were seeing my behavior. And I did get on the flight, but I didn't feel very good about it afterwards. Okay. So now I'm much more aware when I have to rebook a flight. And I know that sometimes you do have to nudge and push, but there's different ways of nudging and pushing. Yeah. There's a polite way and there's a rude way. So choose the polite way. Okay. The other situation, also an airplane one, I was flying back from Knoxville, Tennessee. It's many years ago. And I had just gotten done teaching the 5 forces to practice at the time of death and to practice while we're alive. This is one of the teachings in the 7-point mind training. Yeah, very important teaching. And it really describes how to practice, during your whole life. And it emphasizes reducing the self-centered thought and thinking of other sentient beings as more important than ourselves. Okay, so there was a long flight. I was going back to Seattle. I had to go from Knoxville to, I don't know, somewhere, and then to somewhere else, and then Seattle. Okay, so, and I had deliberately, because I travel a lot, booked an aisle seat. Yeah, because I knew that I would be on the flight all day, a flight all day. So I get on the flight and I go to my seat and somebody is sitting in it. Yeah, has that ever happened to you on a flight? And I said, "Oh, excuse me." I said, "Very nice. Excuse me, that is my seat." And I showed her my ticket. And she said, "Oh, yes, but I was really hoping to sit there because I'm in the middle seat and it's really uncomfortable for me sitting in the middle seat. So I was really hoping to be able to switch seats with who's ever sitting on the aisle." And I said, "I'm tired too. And I was really looking forward to sitting in the aisle seat because I have a long flight ahead of me." Yeah. So, and I booked it in advance to make sure I had an aisle seat. So please move over. So she moved over and I sat in my seat. My seat. And it was legitimately my seat because even the flight attendants would agree that the number on my little ticket matched the number on that seat. So it was mine. And I felt so rotten because I had just gotten done teaching all about cherishing others more than yourself. And what was the first thing I did on the flight? I cherished myself more than others over a stupid seat on an airplane. So then I turned to her and I said, "How about if we just split the time in the seat? I'll sit in it for a while and then we'll switch and then you can have a chance to sit in it." And she said, "No, it's okay. I'll just stay in the middle seat." And then I felt really rotten. I felt really rotten and also a little bit relieved that I would still have the aisle seat. And then when we landed, and you stand up, I looked and I said, "Now that is no longer my seat. And I really don't care who sits in it now. Why was I so attached to my seat at one moment of time? And now I couldn't care less about that seat." It was a very interesting question to ask myself. Yeah. When we say my, what happens? We grab something like this, and because of the circumstance, and then another circumstance, complete nothing. Who cares who sits there? It's so interesting, to watch what we consider as mine and how we make such a big deal of it in one moment. And in another moment, who cares? Okay. Venerable Meito, does that answer your question okay? You're okay. Oh, there was also one other thing that I forgot to mention when we were talking about something about things to check out before you ordain. And I was saying yesterday, it's important to know which Buddhist tradition you're following, which kind of meditation practice really appeals to you, and which teacher really touches your heart and inspires you in the Dharma. And you can have many teachers. Yeah, it doesn't have to be just one teacher. There's probably going to be one teacher that you rely on more than others. Yeah, that's often called your root spiritual mentor. But it can be very helpful to have different teachers because some people will explain the Dharma in a slightly different way that gives you a different perspective on it. Some people specialize in a certain teaching, and hearing it from that person, can really enlarge your mind. And then also some teachers have tons of disciples, and it's very difficult to have a personal relationship with them. And then other teachers have fewer disciples, not because they aren't as good of a teacher, that has nothing to do with it, but because they just prefer to be more in the background. And those teachers you can have more personal time with and ask questions to, and so on. Okay, so it can be helpful in that way to have different teachers that you rely on. When you go to see a teacher privately, you should really go with Dharma questions. Yeah, not, where shall I live? What job should I take? Should I pay off my loan now or should I pay it off later? Should I marry this person or not marry this person? Um, that's not the role of the spiritual mentor. We should want to speak about the Dharma. Sometimes you have questions about your meditation practice. That's fine, if something's coming up in your practice or you're seeing something is coming up that hasn't come up before, and some affliction or some memory or whatever, and you need some help. You need, some advice about how to deal with it, how to work with your mind. Those kinds of things are very helpful to ask to your spiritual mentors. I say this because here's another story. When I was in Malaysia, okay, and one woman came to see me and said, well, I've been going out with this guy for a really long time. Should I marry him? You're asking me if you should marry that guy? How in the world am I supposed to know that? What do you want to do? So I was shocked by the question because I didn't, what am I supposed to say? And then she goes on before I had a chance to say anything. And she said, well, we have different teachers come here to teach. So the first teacher, a few teachers ago, I asked him if I should marry the guy. And he said yes. And the next teacher who came, I asked him if I should marry this man because I was still undecided, even though the first teacher said yes. I was still undecided. And the second teacher said, no, you shouldn't marry him. So what do you think? Should I marry him or not? And I said, what do you want to do? Yeah? What do you want to do? Who you marry is your choice. It's not my choice. And I don't have any special wisdom to tell you who to marry and who not to marry. My friend Alex Berzin once went to our teacher, Serkum Rinpoche. Alex was living in Dharamsala at the time and having trouble with his landlord. He was renting this little place which is a whole story in itself, which I won't tell you now. But anyway, so he was having trouble with the landlord. And so he went to Serkan Rinpoche and said, I'm having this trouble with my landlord. What do I do? And Rinpoche said, go ask a lawyer. Yeah. How am I supposed to know? Yeah. Go ask a lawyer. So then I think that's what Alex did. Yeah, you have a question.
I will like more about the monk of the history. Do you tell us? The monk that don't use the
robes.
The robes, because you say that that behavior degrade the Dharma, and I will like why, because I have a big deal with be unsuitable. Unsuitable.
What being unsuitable?
I feel that I will be unsuitable frequently.
Oh, out of place wearing robes?
No. With yes, with my behavior and with many things, but I don't know how.
Like that. Yeah, like that. Or otherwise, say it in Spanish, and Venerable Nemo will translate.
Venerable Thubten.
Yeah.
¿Me puedes ayudar? Me gustaría saber más sobre la historia del monje, porque su comportamiento degrada el Dharma, porque pues como que ser inadecuado pues, es una cosa que me afecta mucho. Entonces, es algo que pienso para ser una monja y no ser adecuada y de pronto afectar la comunidad o afectar el Dharma. Y entonces como que me parece que si el monje dice, si yo no puedo llevar como con honor los hábitos, entonces pues como que mejor no los tengo porque soy una imagen. Entonces ahí me confunde algo.
Yes, she would like to hear some more about the story of the monk who was choosing not to wear robes for some part of the day because she is really impacted by the thought of denigrating the Dharma and not being a proper representative of the Dharma. And if she's concerned about doing anything wearing robes that might reflect negatively on the teachings or reflect negatively on the monastic community. And so she would like to know more about that so as to get over her concern. She's very concerned about, if she wears robes that she might do or have some kind of an action or behavior unknowingly perhaps that may not be suitable for a monastic. And so she really would like to know more about that.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, if you can't understand my English, then say so and somebody will translate for you, okay? So the case with this monk is, my guess he had probably ordained when he was quite young because his parents took him to the monastery. That's my guess. I don't know for sure. But he came to the West and there were no other monastics there. And all of a sudden, he had all this freedom that he didn't have in the monastery. None of his teachers were there, no other monastics who, would know how he's supposed to act and so on. And so he just wanted to be like everybody else. Okay? And walk around in lay clothes and go to the movies. And the people in the Dharma Center it was very interesting because they were driving me somewhere. And it became clear to me that they didn't really know how to be around a monastic, because they asked me, this was in Kansas City, Kansas. And so there's some casinos in the area around on Indian land. And they asked me, is it suitable to take a monk to a casino? And guess what I said? You know? So, you know, he wanted, I assumed they were kind of probably talking about him. And so they didn't know how to be around monks. He didn't want to be in that role. He, you know, he just wanted to mix in. So that was reflective of his mental state. Okay. If you ordain as a nun, yeah, and you have that intention that you want to be a nun and you want to behave properly, yeah, then you'll be okay. If you have the thing of I'm a nun, but I'm special, then that can lead to some very rude behavior. But if you have just the thing of, you know, I'm a nun, and you know, I'm training my mind to put other people more important than myself. But you still have to, you know, when people show respect, you have to accept that respect. You know, but when you have a conscience about this, then you monitor your own behavior and you're usually okay. It's usually what I've seen is people who have not been trained. So this is important why you know, stay in a monastic community. It's usually people who haven't been trained. They may have lived at many, many Dharma centers and gone to many, many teachings, but monastic training is different than living in a Dharma center and going to regular teachings. Okay. And so those people often do not look so good. And here's another story. Somebody that I knew quite well, he was well, not real well, but you know, he was one of my students, and he was the spiritual director at a Dharma center. And it was a Dharma center, but it was a retreat center too. And so many people came for retreats and courses and stuff. And we were talking one day, and he said, you know, there's a lot of nuns who live around here, but they really, how did he put it? But they're really difficult to deal with. Yeah. So there were people there. I knew these people that he was talking about. I knew them for many years. And I knew that they could be difficult people. But why were they difficult? Because there was no training. Yeah. And yeah. So, you know, this is why I think training and staying with other monastics very important. Yeah. But I don't think you need to worry, because you already have that mind that doesn't want to, you know, it's a mental factor called consideration for others, where you are aware that your behavior influences other people, and you don't want your behavior to make people lose faith in the three jewels, or to make people lose faith in you as a person. Yeah. When you have that mental factor, that acts as something to refrain from doing negativity. So it's a mental factor that we try and develop and cultivate in our mind. A companion to that mental factor is one called integrity or self-respect. Sometimes this is translated as shame, but shame has many different meanings, and it's I think, a really bad translation for this mental factor. Rather, this one is a sense of your own integrity. You respect yourself, you respect the practice that you do, and you want to act properly, because that's the kind of person you want to be. Yeah. So the one about integrity is it helps you to have introspective awareness and mindfulness of your precepts. Integrity does that because you respect yourself and you have certain standards and values that you want to live by. And consideration for others, again, helps you refrain from negativity. But this time, the reason is because you don't want to ruin the faith of others or adversely affect other living beings. Okay, so these are two mental factors that are very important. When you look here, you know what I just said? If you know low rig, I was just talking about a whole bunch of different mental factors. Okay. And so here's how to apply the low rig teachings to our lives.
I wanted to also call to attention, perhaps not just talking about the unsuitable behavior of some monastics, but also looking at how the monastic training happens while living in community. Because one of the things that I have noticed for myself is when I started here, living here, that my mind was much more focused on individual things, on being an individual, on my own likes and dislikes, what I wanted to do with my time, how I should spend my time, and what was important to me. But as a result of the training of living in community, I've gained a deeper perspective on what it is to be together with monastics, to work together towards a common goal, to be part of a common vision, to sort of join our skills and abilities and push towards the same way and impacting the community and other individuals in a different way because we're doing it together. And so to me, that's a big part of the training as well, is that it's the refined behavior, the more focused mind, the emphasis on community work, that all comes about as a result of living in community. And I've had the opportunity to observe that difference when I go out into groups of people who have not had the great fortune of living in community as we do. And so I find that to be really an incredible addition to my practice, is to have this opportunity and to have the mindset to be more focused on that rather than on my own individual goals and aspirations.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. This is also something that's quite important and that happens because we usually come into a situation with our first concern after we ordain is, and before we ordain, is my Dharma practice. There's that 2-letter word again. My Dharma practice. And when you live in community and when you train in order to be able to take higher ordination and become fully ordained, then you realize it's not just about my Dharma practice. Yeah, it's about something bigger than me. And we usually think, well, my Dharma practice is bigger than me. I'm working for the benefit of all sentient beings. And I remember, when I was a baby nun, standing at Kopan, talking to one monk and thinking, what is he talking about? He was just reading Newsweek magazine, and now he's talking about something. And I want to go meditate on compassion, and this sentient being is disturbing me. Pretty strange. That was showing the level of my mind at that time. Yeah. I want to meditate on compassion for you, but what you're doing now is bugging me and interfering with my Dharma practice. So, yeah, it's something we're very attached to at the beginning, and to get over that and work for a purpose that's larger than ourselves and work together with a group. And we're not going to necessarily work on our own schedule. Yeah, remember, I told you, like, the first day, one of the things people don't like is the schedule. I want to work when I get up in the morning. It's the best time for me to work. So I'll do my offering service from 5:30 to 7 o'clock every morning. And then I'll have breakfast, and then I'll go meditate after that. Yeah. And I don't like such long offering service times. I want a shorter offering service time. Yeah. And I'll plan my own schedule because I know how to get my work done and do things well. So leave me alone and get off my back and stop bossing me around and telling me what to do, because I am an individual. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Just in relation to Jenny's concern, I was also one thing that I felt just so helpful in community life is that you, as a young nun, you have some kind of protection. You have protection to grow. So I feel alone. When you're alone, you're observed mainly from lay people already from the beginning, but you are not. I mean, there's so many things. You just put your robes on, but all the other things you need to learn somehow. I mean, it's not just changing by taking your robes on. No? So there's a lot of things that you need to learn from just having being properly dressed, starting with, and then all the other things.
How to keep
no?
your Shemdap up.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. And not having all kind of out of shape and all the things. And then all the other things from moving, from walking, but also all the inner mental states that we want to cultivate. So that's a long, long process. But especially at the beginning, I feel exactly community offers that protection of, yeah, sure, we are just starting. I mean, we will be totally out of shape sometimes because we just started. So we just have these outer signs, but there is a lot to learn. And so in the community, I feel you have this protection to grow and not yet being so judged from a bigger community, but you have the protection that you can grow into that exactly personality and monastic life coming together, and then slowly you can also stand when you're judged and you're from more outside. But yeah, I think this protection phase, I think, is a very important part from community also.
Yeah. So you're protected because you stay in the community, so you're not so exposed to people outside at the beginning. And so that mind that thinks, am I acting properly? You can kind of put that aside for a while and instead focus on really training yourself. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to add one more thing, and that is I remember how much it took me by surprise that being here at the Abbey and focusing so much on offering service and also doing the rites accumulated, I think, an incredible amount of merit that then naturally supports a person to grow in their practice. So while it may seem like we're not spending as much time studying or on our practice, that is our practice, and that supports us to grow in a way that can be a little deceptive. We may not be able to pin down and identify, oh, this offering service is so beneficial to me.
Yeah.
Or doing the rites, the posada and the rains retreat and the month.
Yeah. The rites are quite important, aren't they? And in the Tibetan tradition, they it depends where you're living. I mean, of course, in Dharamsala, they'll do the posada, but not at all the monasteries. Yeah, and posadas really makes a big difference. Posada is our fortnightly confession and restoration of precepts. This coming Sunday is the next posada day. We'll be doing it there then, and we have a kind of a ceremony also for lay people to do a confession and restoration of their precepts. Okay, let's dedicate.